One day, I want to walk the Camino de Santiago de Compostela in Spain. I was impressed with Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist and decided to read his other books. I was equally intrigued by his first book, The Pilgrimage, where he walked the Camino de Santiago and was greatly changed by the experience. If I could travel there now and walk the way of St. James, I would. For now, I am left searching for my own path in California, and I discovered that we could also have a Camino de Santiago de California. One of the peaks on Saddleback Mountain in Orange County, California, was named after St. James or Santiago. A creek near the mountain was named Santiago Creek by the Portola expedition in 1769, and later the USGS named one of the peaks of Saddleback Mountain Santiago Peak in 1894. It is fitting that on the peak of Santiago is a cathedral of telecommunication towers, a symbol perhaps of our modern age in contrast to the stone cathedral of St. James in Compostela, Spain. Atop Santiago Peak, one can ponder the changing world that we live in, the footprints of the past upon it, and how we will ultimately strive to leave it better for future generations. I decided to create my own path, my own quest, hoping that Southern California will continue to become a region of walkers, with trails stretching across mountains and into local neighborhoods. We already see hopeful change with the Rails to Trails work. The popular Pacific Crest Trail passes through Southern California, and more trails are continually being added. People are returning to the land, but I dream for more. We are so tied to our cars, especially in California, and many people still view the mountains and nature as something out there. If you walk through the city with a backpack on, people think you are perhaps homeless, and there is perhaps some social stigma to be seen doing it. But on the Camino de Santiago de Compostela, it must be common for locals to see hikers all the time and welcome them into their communities. I want to bring the backpack down from the mountain and into our communities, and let it be a symbol of adventure and quest, even in the city. For a long time, I have had my eyes on Saddleback Mountain and Santiago Peak. Its distinctive shape captures the eye, and I was intrigued by it even before I knew anything about it. Until 2017, I had never even been to the Santa Ana mountain range, or hiked in the Cleveland National Forest. In July of 2016, I had walked from the inland valley starting in Etiwanda to the desert valley ending in Vallarmo at the Saint Andrews Abbey. A contraction of Valle and Yermo, it means barren valley. As I was entering the valley into Devil's Punch Bowl, there I saw off in the distance a mountain that looked very similar in shape to Saddleback Mountain. I discovered that it was Saddleback Butte, and I decided that I wanted to walk from Saddleback to Saddleback. Saddleback to Saddleback has a nice ring to it. For me, they are like two bookcase bookends, holding between them a stack of mountains, written with tales and stories of adventure in the rocks and wisp of the wind. In the middle stands the tallest of the San Gabriels, Mount San Antonio, the crowning glory of the entire display. There is a perfect symmetry to it all. The inland valley and the desert valley mirror each other, and at the same time are complete opposites. By traveling through each valley and the mountains between, one must face the hidden dualities within oneself, the mountain highs and valley lows, having abundance of water and supplies, contrasted with potentially having very little, or running out if not careful. One must become real about the beliefs we carry and the hard facts of the trail. One must adopt a balanced approach, understanding a full spectrum of terrains, from mountain to desert, and from city to suburb to countryside. But, to be honest, I am still afraid of the desert. The previous year when I entered the desert, I had run low on water and suffered for it. For this reason, I decided to start closer to home. I discovered a retreat center near Santiago Peak that had a similar vision to my own, the Santiago Retreat Center. I contacted them expressing my interest in staying a night there. I had planned to start at the Santiago Retreat Center, but those plans fell through. Instead, my mother drove me up the road to Silverado and dropped me off at the Maple Springs Trailhead in the Cleveland National Park. I loved the mountain road leading up to the trailhead and the small mountain community living there. When we got out of the car, there were flowers blooming and tiger swallowtails everywhere. From there, I spent the entire day walking up the mountain on a truck trail. By nightfall, I was probably near Majeska Peak, and spent the night near a communication tower on another peak. In the morning, I ascended to the top of Santiago Peak and spent the entire day descending the main Divide truck trail, passing by Blue Jay Campground, and later El Carrizo Hot Shot Camp. I walked down the El Carrizo truck trail and found a place off to the side to sleep for the night, in my bivy sack, overlooking Lake Elsinore. In the morning, I walked down the rest of the way to Lake Elsinore and enjoyed 2 veggie footlongs at Subway. I had made plans to stay at the House of Siloam and soak in their natural hot spring water. They are located next to the historic Crescent Bathinghouse, now known presently as the Chimes. I met up with my mother there, we ate at Archibald's drive-thru, and we spent the night in the Hot Springs Motel. I had painful blisters on my feet and soaked them in the warm, sulfuric water. I had also gotten a lighter pair of shoes at the local Big Five, but the damage was done, and I would have to trudge on through the pain. I continued on alone the next day, passing through Warm Springs and up Lindale Road, near Walker Canyon, famous locally for its poppy blooms. It was a hot, dry day, and I made my way towards Hartford Springs, encouraged by sights of Saddleback Mountain behind me and the Cucamonga and San Gabriel mountain range ahead. In Hartford Springs, I found a spring and rested there several hours, but could not sleep because of a cold draft. Therefore, I continued walking at 3 o'clock in the morning. I had enjoyed listening to the frogs all around me and insects chirping in an orchestral symphony. By early morning, I had made my way to Riverside, enjoyed another 2 veggie footlongs at Subway, and stopped by White Park to rest until my room at the Santa Cruz Inn was open for check-ins. I walked around the Mission Inn, and later in the afternoon, Mount Rubidoux. Later, I met up with my mother, we ate at Chipotle, and then spent the night in my room. Mother decided to go home that night, though, so we parted ways, and in the morning I headed through Rubidoux, passed between Jurupa Hills and up Sierra Avenue, all the way to the San Sylvain Truck Trail. I followed the truck trail, and by nightfall stopped at Buck Point. It was surprisingly cold there, too, despite being in the middle of June. Part of this was my doing, though, because I tried to pack light and didn't pack a sleeping bag, just my bivy sack. I was chilled all night and decided to start hiking early again in the morning. I made it to Joe Elliott Campground and started ascending the face of Etiwanda Peak by sunrise. Despite starting early in the morning, however, I was actually falling behind my schedule for where I needed to be. I had planned to spend the previous night at the top of Baldy and hadn't made it that far. I had made reservations on Hip Camp to spend the night at the Angelus Crest Creamery, a working goat farm with private campsites and a cabin on a sag pond along the San Andreas Fault. I walked as fast as I could that day, crossing over Etiwanda, Cucamonga, down to Icehouse Saddle, Timber, Telegraph, and Thunder Mountain. I stopped at the Baldy Notch Ski Lodge for lunch and continued on to Mount San Antonio, down the North Backbone Trail, over Dawson Peak, Pine Mountain, and then on to the Blue Ridge Truck Trail. When I arrived here, it started getting dark, and I started getting confused by the truck trail, thinking I was going the wrong way on another truck trail that didn't lead to Inspiration Point. Because of this, I kept going back and forth until I stayed on the Pacific Crest Trail, knowing better how to navigate this trail in the dark. But I was worried about finding the Angeles Crest Creamery in the dark, and decided to call my mother and tell her I wasn't able to make it there, where we planned to camp that night together. Instead, I would need a pickup from Inspiration Point. I had bad reception on my phone, and my mother on hers, but we were both fortunate enough to get through and find each other. She showed up shortly after I arrived, but was worried out of her mind, because she forgot where Inspiration Point was. We had been there before, so I thought she knew. Despite having made plans for months and sharing them with my mother, family, and friends, there was still room for improvement. We drove down the highway to our campsite, and I soon fell asleep. I had planned to continue walking down the Angeles Crest Highway to Llano and finish at Saddleback Butte State Park in Lancaster. However, I decided to quit and return when I was healed. My first go at it taught me some painful lessons. By the time I reached Inspiration Point in Wrightwood, my blisters were pretty severe. I returned a week or two later to continue hiking the path I had intended, making it to Jackson Lake and then down the Angeles Crest Highway to Llano. I would return again several times to hike all the way down to the Llano Del Rio ruins of the famous socialist experiment in the desert, which also suffered some painful lessons of its own. The heat of summer came, and I never returned to finish the last stretch of 13.6 miles. I would like to do the entire stretch still, from Saddleback to Saddleback. The next time, however, I will start in the desert at Saddleback Butte and finish at the Cathedral of Towers on top of Saddleback Mountain at Santiago Peak. It will be just like they do in Spain, where pilgrims finish at the tomb of St. James at the city's cathedral.